What happened on board MH370? The Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777-200ER departs Kuala Lumpur for Beijing on March 8, 2014 at 12:42 a.m. with 239 passengers. The plane takes off and has normal radio exchanges. At 1:19, it sends its final vocal message. At 21 minutes past midnight, less than 2 minutes later, the plane stops transmitting. Because you know that civilian air traffic controllers actually follow the transponder. It's the plane that sends this information: altitude, speed, direction, trajectory, and position. The plane stopped transmitting at that moment. It becomes invisible to the civilian air traffic controllers in the region. However, you have radar systems, which we call primary radars, where there is really an echo because we really have waves that are going to hit on a metallic object which will come back, and a Boeing 777 not being a stealth plane. We will continue tracking the plane's movements even after it disappears from all civil radars, including the Flight Radar 24 site, which also monitors this information. Primary radars give us important information when the plane stopped transmitting. It was therefore in its turn beyond Diggory to continue towards Bitode. On this turn, it was still with an active navigation mode, because the angle of the turn continued at 15 degrees. We were in a turn that was in lateral navigation mode. So we have a system that continues to function, at least partially. We only have the emissions at that moment that are cut off to the outside. The plane will continue towards Bitode. It will continue halfway between Bitode and Higari, and there will be a U-turn. This U-turn involves civil, military, and primary radars from 3 countries tracking the plane from that point forward. The turn is made from a tight turn. It was estimated to be a 35-degree turn. We were no longer on autopilot. There was a takeover of the machine to make this turn, which was relatively sharp. The turn is made to return to Malaysia. It's a U-turn towards Kota Bharu, on which there is an airport, but we continue on this trajectory. The plane, there is a very important element at that moment. When he stopped transmitting on his transponder, we didn't know at that time, but he had also stopped sending information, messages to cars, and also the information, the exchanges that there are with the satellite. However, the exchanges with the satellite, normally when we turn off the kind of satellite modem called the satellite data unit, the satellite data unit sends a number of cut-off messages. However, it's indicated in the reports there is no evidence of a cutoff initiated from the cockpit of the satellite communication system. Second report a little further on. There is no evidence the satellite communication link was manually locked off from the cockpit. So, we not only have the system that stops transmitting, we have this system that is electrically cut off. The satellite communication in the cockpit has been electrically disconnected, either due to removed electrical breakers or a self-protected system. There is no manual disconnection or intentional shut-off by someone, and that it's relatively important. We will see it for the future. For the rest of the investigation, the plane continues on its trajectory. It's going to cross the entire peninsula. It's heading towards Penang, so it's going straight ahead. On this crossing of the peninsula, there are varying altitudes. In a way, there are variations that are obviously much less significant than what the primary radars recorded that were shared, especially because the primary radars, as much as we can have a position in azimuth and distance that is very precise, the altitudes are not very precise. And so in this case, we know that there are changes. They are not as clear-cut and as strong as what was shared in the reports from the Australian investigation. They tell me we validate the positions, the distances, but frankly the altitudes. We do not believe in such evolutions, even if indeed there were certainly altitude differences, since there are also variations on the speed alone at that moment the plane arrives at. Over Penang, there is something that is relatively important. Not only do we follow the plane from a primary radar point of view, then we have a second indication confirming that we are following the correct echo and plane without confusing it with another device that passes by there. It's that we have the co-pilot's mobile phone that will connect to the terrestrial telephone network. It confirms to us that we are indeed following the right echo. There are many elements that have been shared around this information. The co-pilot sent WhatsApp messages before boarding, then turned off or passed on his phone. It's in airplane mode. In any case, there is no more communication. The phone was turned off before takeoff. The phone was turned back on mid-flight. A pilot has no need for a flashlight, as he always carries one with him. At first glance, it's still a desire to communicate, exchange, or say something. We can't get an answer, but we do know that this phone has been turned back on. The plane connected to the terrestrial network, but due to its speed, no communication occurred. There was no exchange. It simply proves to us that the phone was initiated, turned back on. But we can't give a cause or reason or will for that, unfortunately. The plane proceeds on its path, making a minor turn towards the Strait of Malacca, tracked by the 3 visible radars. Unfortunately, the primary radar that was located at Banda AAC, which is broken but has been broken for several days. The breakdown wasn't sudden, it had been malfunctioning for days, as was well known. So the plane continues on this trajectory, and to come back a little bit on this situation, at that moment uncertainties remain. I'm sharing information we know now, but at that time we were unaware the co-pilot's cell phone had pinged. We have the primary radar information, and the military are questioning which side the plane is on. On March 8th, we searched the Gulf of Thailand between Malaysia and Vietnam. Malaysian authorities announced in daily press conferences that the search in the Strait of Malacca began on March 9th, based on indications, and continued from March 10th onward. We have extended or moved the search area, and like last night, we also sent elements to search in the commentary, but then we don't have as with the commentary. But then we don't have, as we invented that the plane had passed to the other side we invented that the plane had passed to the other side 4 days later. The search in the Strait of Malacca began as early as March 9th. And the time to lift this uncertainty, knowing that the plane was at the right echo that we had followed, because we can't recognize it, they also continued to search after March 8, and they continued also to search after March 8 in the area, so they were searching in both areas. Only several days later, they completely abandoned the search in the Gulf of Thailand to focus entirely on the Strait of Malacca. Claims that the military discovered the incident 4 days later are false. We know that the military searched on both sides, and indeed we searched on the side of the Andaman Sea in the Strait of Malacca from March 9th. On March 12th, there is absolutely incredible information that comes up. It's that the plane continued to respond to satellites, started to emit again for several hours after its flight. The continued failure to locate the plane via satellite indicates that the search area is incorrect. The plane flew for over 4 hours. The plane resuming communications with the satellite is crucial, as we have initializations. The satellite data unit, as we said earlier, it suffered a power outage. It was not turned off normally. There it has an electrical restoration. This message, which we call a logon request, proves that the satellite data unit was no longer electrically powered, and that it was then turned back on. So that's fundamental. Behind it, there is a whole initialization process. There are the entertainment systems, the in-flight entertainment that will connect, so we have the normal initialization process. The calls from the operations center to the satellite phone that opens in the cockpit were no longer yielding anything up to that point. They are going to start ringing again. That is to say, there is a dial tone, no one is answering, but it's ringing again in the cockpit, so we really have a reset of all the systems. And in addition, you know that a signal, not only is there this logon request, so there is the message from the plane trying to reconnect to the satellite and doing so, but in addition, this signal, the reset time is not quite normal. You already have frequencies that are slightly offset. That means, and it would mean, and the reports will confirm it later, that the plane was cooled down. So here you can read here. An explanation for this difference in the frequency, burst frequency offset, could be the condition of the plane between 1722 and 1825 Zulu. For example, a cooling of the satellite data unit, which could be explained by a very cold ambient temperature, the plane depressurized. The satellite data unit underwent depressurization at minus 50 degrees Celsius, causing it to cool and respond with an abnormal frequency. Not only is the frequency abnormal, but the initialization time is also slower than expected. Instead of starting the sequence with precise timing, the in-flight entertainment takes longer than usual to begin. And after the satellite data unit is reset with the satellite, we have the plane that will respond. It will respond by phone, satellite, for example, when we call the cockpit, but also to a series of exchanges that are automatic, which are carried out from that the plane is always in its coverage area, and that the plane is always in its coverage area. And there, it's as if your mobile phone is being queried by the terrestrial telephone network. Even if there is no exchange, it checks. Are you still in my coverage area? Yes. And in this case, I continue to allocate you a frequency band. The satellite's management area spans from France to Australia, making it massive. It doesn't allow for precise plane positioning, only confirming its presence. Still, the satellite plane communications provide some information. I would refer you to the more precise video in which I explain how to define arcs of circle of distance between the satellite and the plane for each of these messages that we call pings. The ping contains no information except that it has a frequency, like any signal, and that it has a response time. Naturally, the slower you are to respond, the further away you are from the satellite, so we can define satellite plane distances 7 times, and that creates what you see here, 7 arcs of a circle with the 7th arc being the last at 19 past midnight. That's the time when the plane reached the end of its flight and fell into the water. By the time we tell the boat, well, actually we have arcs of a circle, it leads us either towards Kazakhstan or towards the South Pole. It's a bit complicated to define these areas, and the boats for now are searching. The investigation boats to search for the black boxes are off the coast of Malaysia, off the coast of Vietnam, off the coast of Thailand. They are very far away. So we're going to redirect all the searches towards almost the South Pole, an area so far from Australia, more than 2,000 kilometers from the Australian coasts, to the point that the maritime patrol planes, the P3s, when they went to the area, they only had 2 hours of autonomy on site to try to search for debris. So the boats coming from the north will have to cover 5,000 kilometers, so at least 5 to 6 days to reach this area. And from this BTO, which allows us to validate that we were indeed on the southern route, we quickly dismissed the northern route towards Kazakhstan because it would have required flying over land, potentially making the route slightly faster. The southern route, therefore, is confirmed between the simulated line that you see here, which is in prediction of the southern route in green, and the frequencies, the evolution of the frequency that was actually measured, which was in blue, so it did analyses, and we realized that it did analyses, and we realized that the straight line, which is an inertial route, that is to say that it is an arc of a circle, it is not simply the plane that was due south and which will cut, and this arc of a circle with an area that was already still a few million square kilometers, so still difficult to investigate. We are on a real greenhouse arc that makes the whole length, and which makes there are quite a few hypotheses, but we already have quite a few hypotheses. But we already have the reports, especially the reports that tell us how we do the underwater search, which tell us that in which, so we said it, because of the analyses. In which, so we said it, because the subsequent analyses tell us that the cooling, etc., when we had the return, the electrical restoration, proves that there was a cooling. There we also have the end of the flight, which is this straight line, in which they show us that we have a flight that strongly resembles what we have in previous hypoxic flights. Some examples. In 99, a Learjet 35 that will do 4 hours in a straight line. So this plane is going to go from Orlando to Dallas, depressurization in flight. Unaware, the pilots maintain course, resulting in the plane crashing in northern Canada. And so the second example is the Helios flight in 2005, which is a plane that takes off from Cyprus, which has a cockpit that is not really understood by the pilots. They do not understand that the plane is poorly pressurized, depressurized. They do not put on their oxygen masks. The masks fall for the passengers, but the passenger masks only have about a dozen minutes of autonomy, so people after a while run out of oxygen. The aircraft will fly nearly to Athens before being intercepted by fighter jets, with turns seen at the end of the flight path. There was still someone in the cockpit who understood the problem. Who had arrived? A flight attendant who had some knowledge of piloting. Unfortunately, he was not able to regain control. At that point, the plane had run out of fuel, even on a hypoxic flight lasting several hours. We can still have cases in which there are turns if a pilot had fallen on his stick. At that moment, the plane would have made a turn, so it is exactly in this same type of situation. We have a very long hypoxic flight, several hours due south, but there was obviously no destination in the south. The last moments of the plane, we have information that is quite precise about the sequence of events because the plane continues to send messages. So there is the last hourly ping where the plane responds to the satellite. Again, a log on request, the famous initialization message of again a log on request, the famous initialization message of again a log on request, and that there was again a log on request, and that there was again a power cut, and therefore a power restoration. This tells us that a few minutes before, and in fact when we talk about seventh arc, it's several pings that have been merged because they are a few seconds apart, but in reality the plane sends messages. When an engine shuts down due to a problem, a message is usually sent. However, in this case, no message is sent, only a ping is transmitted to the satellite, resulting in limited communication. At 17 minutes and 30 seconds past midnight, the shutdown of the lift engine. At 18 minutes and 30 seconds past midnight, the relighting of the auxiliary power unit, which are deduced from the fact that we can have a logon request. We have this logon request at 19 minutes and 29 seconds past midnight. A second ping is detected, which is 1/8 of the vertical speed. Especially a fall between these two of the vertical speed, especially a fall between these two pings. And we have at 20 past midnight and 1 and 6 seconds, we would have expected the in-flight entertainment reset initialization that we do not receive, so it means that the plane fell into the water before the end of its reset phase. The last pings could be exploited since the final two messages sent seconds apart lack distancing. Without distancing or falling, the measured descent rates were 15,000, 24,000 achieved, and at least 14,000 feet per minute sent seconds apart. And achieved, but at the very least, 14,000 feet per minute and up to 24,000 feet per minute. So the plane was going up to 24,000 feet per minute. So the plane was also going according to the simulations that were made. From the information, the plane going south, on which there is an electrical failure, it will leave. There is a moment where you no longer have an engine, because you no longer have an engine, because you no longer have any more hydraulic pressure, and no more electricity. The asymmetry makes the plane go to the left, turn engaged, and which can move the plane up to 32 nautical miles from the place where it will start to fall. 32 nautical miles around a heap of circle that makes thousands of kilometers in length particularly complicated. The problem is that we don't have any other information while we are doing research, and for years we will do this research. Until July 2016, we conducted underwater investigations in the area that is much too large, with black boxes that stopped transmitting after a month. Already the black boxes, I remind you that underwater we barely hear them. Stopped transmitting about 10 days, 15 days after the boats arrived in the area. And the area we started to investigate, the one that is, it is much too far and we have no information. We search further north, we are looking in the wrong place. I remind you of the Rio Paris, we had debris. We had bodies, we had things that floated in the days that followed. We recovered dozens and dozens, and while it still took us 2 years to find the plane from the incredible nuclear submarines, 2 years to search and find the plane while we were just next to it. Imagine, it's logical that we didn't find the plane given the size of the area, which was gigantic, especially since we started looking in the wrong place. A year and a half later, in July 2015, you have the first piece of the plane that will wash up on the African coast, and notably on the French island of Reunion. This piece, the flaperon, which you see here, has been analyzed in every way, obviously. We see that there is life. It has undergone shocks, it has undergone twists, it has been particularly rich, and obviously there are numbers of... The find has been notably abundant, with serial numbers verifying the debris is from MH370. More pieces are expected to be recovered gradually. We have the right flap and the horizontal stabilizer. We have an engine cover that has the horizontal stabilizer. We have an engine cover that washed up on South Africa. We see here the Rolls-Royce logo. We managed to identify, even if there is no serial number, a certain number of information you see here. We have the R that was on the piece we recovered, which corresponds to the way of painting that we had on the Eagles in Malaysia. The interior is not identical to typical Boeings. For a 40-minute analysis of the various debris and what we gleaned from it, I suggest watching my video if you're curious. In any case, we have about 30 pieces of Boeing 777 that are recovered with different levels of certainty, but when you recover a piece of 777 in the south of the Indian Ocean, you can well imagine that it's a piece of MH370, so we have certainties, very probable ones, and others where it's just a piece of 777. But in any case, these elements have no systematic legal evidence, and so we were able to extract a lot of information from it. The first obviously is about positioning. Look where these pieces ended up. Debris from Reunion, Mozambique, and South Africa arrived on Mauritius Island, and we will be able to, I told you earlier that there were crustaceans that had developed. By analyzing these crustaceans, we will be able to see, through biological analysis, where they were, at what time, what was the temperature at each moment of their growth, and in relation to the water temperature in the 18 months that preceded. And so we indeed know that the flaperon has passed and that the different pieces have passed. It means that the search area, which was all the way south, is not the right one. This confirms that we should have gone further north. Second element, these debris arriving on Africa, it proves to us once again that we were on the north of the arc, because if the plane had fallen to the south, the currents would have sent all the debris back to Australia, and up to the pink, here, they arrive on Australia, but from the yellow, the white, the red, there, we really arrive on Africa. So, in the summer of 2016, we understand that we searched in the wrong place, but we have already spent $200 million on research in the wrong place. Unfortunately, it was too late. We also had analyses of acoustic gravity waves, so there was a little hope at one point, a little later in 2017, because we have underwater microphones that are supposed to track secret underwater nuclear tests, to see precisely that there is no nuclear proliferation. These microphones record a lot of things. They record, for example, at sea. They will sometimes record meteorites falling into the sea. They will sometimes record meteorites falling into the sea. They will sometimes record meteorites falling to Earth. Volcanoes, underwater volcanoes. So, all this, we tried to analyze, see if there were any splash sounds, because obviously a plane falling into the water would make a sound. Unfortunately, nothing was found. The sounds did not match the end of the plane's flight and the time to the end of the plane's flight, and the locations did not match either. So unfortunately, the locations did not match either. So unfortunately, it did not yield anything interesting. Some microphones were not working at that time, but the ones that were working and published did not give any different results compared to the third one. In May 2018, you have, from all the information we could analyze, because there we had the retro drifts, the additional analyses of the Defense Science and Technology Group, so we have more precise things. You have a private will to relaunch the searches with this boat that will try to find the plane. However, it ultimately fails. And so you have a final investigation that was carried out by the people of the IG group, so the group of investigators, incredible experts at the global level, who published an investigation in March 2020 that points to an area that has not been investigated, which would be the most probable area, in which, if we could restart the searches, we would restart the searches in this area, which is gigantic, but at least in which we have a great chance of finding the plane if we resume the studies. These are for the factual elements, and also a little bit why we didn't find the plane. So we're going to go over the technical elements and potential causes of this sequence of events now. The first one is an event that would be technical. We imagine a fire on board. The plane arrives at Higari. We imagine a fire on board. The plane arrives at Higari, a Boeing 777 from Etihad Company. It has a Boeing 777 from Etihad Company. There is a fire in the hold that triggers because there were cables that had been incorrectly positioned with an electric arc that was made between two electric cables, and therefore a start of a fire. Well, we can imagine that. Second hypothesis, the Boeing 777s built in 2002 have experienced in significant proportions anomalies in the windshield heating system. And here it's the rate of anomalies, the incident rate according to Yamaha 310 was built in 2000. Yamaha 310 was built in 2002. You see that there is a rate that is abnormally high. These are things that we will discover later. There were investigations that were carried out, but we cannot find that. Until we have gone to retrieve the plane, we cannot know exactly who comes from the cargo, the famous Motorola batteries of which we do not know exactly the volume. Was there a problem? Was there a fire? We don't know if there was a fire in the cockpit while in the hold today. In all these 177 and Boeing 767 aircraft, there is an electrical protection system called the Electrical Load Management System or Electrical Load Management System. This system, in case of fire, in case of electrical anomaly, will discharge the circuits, will stop supplying a certain number of equipment to avoid feeding a box that would be on fire to stop feeding a fire. This system will stop the operation of a certain number of equipment with an order that you see here in order of priority. If ever it's a serious fire, imagine that only the first 4 pieces of equipment here on the left remain. You lose cabin pressurization, you lose the very high frequency communications, you lose cabin pressurization, you lose the very high frequency communications, lose cabin pressurization, you lose the very high frequency communications, the satellite. The navigation system was working. The learning management system can satellite. So the navigation system was working. The learning management system can do without. It's that it can cause depressurization, since we have the oxygen systems, pressurization, which can also be disconnected by depressurization. It can come, as we saw in 1995, in the voltages of the Boeing 777, in which there is a bad closure of the outflow valve, which will block, which will break, and it's cases in test flights that have certainly been corrected afterwards, but having depressurizations, it's not impossible. The other option for having a depressurization would obviously be that the fire attacks the wall of the plane. As you can see here on a 777 of Egypt Air, the depressurization could be a consequence of the fact that the fire attacked the wall of the plane. So when the fire attacked the wall of the plane, when the U-turn would be a turn to return to Kota Baru, which is the first coast, the first airport, which unfortunately is closed. So the pilots turn around because they have a fire on board. They turn around for Kota Baru. Kota Baru is closed. They continue to Penang, and not directly on Penang. They go to the Kennedy Point, which is 11 nautical south of Penang, and which is the interception point of the instrument landing system to land in Penang. So this trajectory, the U-turn, the fact of continuing, can correspond to a desire to land in emergency with a concern on board. We have lost electricity, light, and the pressurization system, but they are unaware of this. We are depressurized, and the plane will try to orient itself towards a diversion field. So here, I'm taking up the story again. Fire, the fire triggers the learning management system. The learning management system, in one way or another, stops all the electrical equipment. There is a depressurization, whether it's related to the e-learning management system or to a hole in the fuselage causing depressurization. A fire is not possible when it's below 27 degrees Celsius or when we are beyond an altitude with enough oxygen. So necessarily the depressurization extinguishes the fire. So the e-learning management system has enough oxygen. So necessarily the depressurization extinguishes the fire. So the electrical load management system restarts the electricity, and that's why you have a power cut and an electrical restoration. So the technical hypothesis, the pilot's depressurization, which put out the fire and restarted the electricity, depressurization, which put out the fire and restarted the electricity, it cannot be excluded. It cannot be excluded. There is in also some debris that were found, notably the piece number 17, because this piece number 17, it has traces of combustion. So we don't know. You see here the trace of combustion that is there. It has been analyzed, but we don't know if the combustion took place, obviously, when the plane was in flight or once the plane had fallen into the water, even if we don't really know what could burn at that time. But in any case, there is a piece that bears traces of fire. We can't say more. Is it this course? We can't say more. Is it this course can say yes, but a fire? The plane can't fly to say yes, but a fire? The plane can't fly anymore. You have a precedent in which the plane stops emitting and continues to fly for more than 10 minutes, off and continues to fly for more than 10 minutes, of MS-804 of Egypt Air, which had taken off right here for Egypt. There is a fire that breaks out in the cockpit. The plane doesn't send. There is no more exchange, but there is a military radar, primary, which will follow the plane in flight for another 11 minutes. So the fact that a plane doesn't emit and continues to fly is not impossible. So in this case, it's an Airbus. It's not exactly the same system, but having a fire in a plane that doesn't fall right away, it's already happened in the past in the context of the Egyptian. The second credible hypothesis is obviously that of hijacking, which is favored by many people because it has the advantage of being simple to explain. The first element is the trajectory. The plane turns around, the plane flies on the air borders between different countries. Planes follow established air routes and avoid entering airspace when flying near borders, ensuring military on both sides don't feel threatened. Both sides do not feel threatened. A commercial plane that flies in cruise flight from There are a few elements that argue in favor of this scenario. Here we are on the figure on the primary radars, so we have the information on the plane that leaves in the Malakam Strait, and we have a trajectory that is done on the lateral navigation, so we are in navigation that is still with beacons on the ground a priori, so a navigation that is voluntary in this trajectory, because what the idea of the fire on board does not explain is why we continued in the Malacca Strait and why there was still this turn to the south. Whereas here, if it was a voluntary trajectory, obviously it's very simple. It's a desire to go unnoticed as far away from radars as possible, and then the desire to escape to the south. For what reasons, I don't know. One element, perhaps the key element, to support this theory is what happened with the transponder. The moment the transponder was turned off, you know there is the automatic dependent surveillance B system that will send information. Here at the bottom right, you have the rotator, and you see here it's the mode to turn it off. You have here the switch to the mode to turn it off. You have here the switch to alt off, altitude off. In other words, the transponder transmits all data except altitude. What we received is that for half a second before being turned off, at 1720, 33 seconds and 61 hundredths, we have the altitude. We have all the normal information from the DSB, but at 1720, 34 seconds and 15 hundredths, then 1720, 34 seconds and 15 hundredths, then 1720, 34 seconds, and it cuts off. Does this half second correspond to the moment when it cuts off? It would be a deliberate action in the cockpit to disconnect it. It would be a deliberate action in the cockpit to disconnect it. So a deliberate action in the cockpit can be a deliberate action. It can also be the will to turn off a box A in the past that we have transponders. It needs them A in the past that we have transponders. It needs them Y. There are a lot of people pointing fingers at them. The pilots are being blamed due to the short timing of less than a minute and a half. The pilots are being blamed because obviously the timing, less than a minute and a half between the good night, goodbye, and the moment to cut off, it's not someone who comes into the cockpit pointing a gun at the temple. In such a short time, it's not possible to take control of the plane to disconnect the systems in a way so efficient. So it would be someone who would already be in the cockpit, maybe one of the pilots who would have carried out this scenario to go unnoticed, to disappear the cause. We know nothing. Is it a hostage taking? Is it a suicide that it's not the why, it's the how it's possible. So it's not the why, it's the how it's possible. So these two scenarios, technical, fire, depressurization, electrical restoration, hypoxic flight to the south, and the second scenario, hijacking, voluntary depressurization goes wrong, then this turn that allows to pass far goes wrong, then this turn that allows to pass far unnoticed, and the big turn to go south, and why we don't know, but in any case, these are the only two scenarios that are technically credible and which are compatible with the data from satellites, data from all civil and military radars, which are compatible with the debris that we have in very large numbers, compatible with the abundant debris we have. Researchers of all levels, incredibly efficient, who have analyzed these, researchers of all levels, incredibly efficient, who have analyzed these data, who have retrieved them, who have collected them. They are freely available on the internet for raw data. You have almost everything that is available except military radars because they hide part of their information. They provide positions, but not always the raw data. While we have raw data on civil radars, primary civil radars, so all this is of such relevant, efficient information can be generated in a few days to mask, taking into account the micro oscillations of the satellite, the passage of the satellite in the shadow of the Earth, also as consistent with each other, could have been generated in such a short time. So that's why we stick to the information we know, and we can deduce one of these two scenarios is the right one. Now we are impossible. This view has been widely advanced. The first, which has been widely advanced, is that of Larry Vance, who was a former Canadian investigator, in the end with a will to carry out a water landing, and in the end with a will to carry out a water landing, and so the water landing was carried out to go unnoticed. And that's why we would have found very few pieces. So he has that we would have found very few pieces. So he has. The problem is, of course, when we hadn't carried out all the analyses that took several years at the beginning, In 2014, 2015, we could believe in this theory. But then when we found pieces, some pieces that show us that the plane disintegrated in flight, it underwent shocks, it underwent vibrations that are incredibly serious. The plane could not have simply been a merry, it was not piloted, it was in free fall. The analysis of the pings also shows us that the plane was falling at an inconsistent speed with the idea of a voluntary landing. The pieces that we found, the flaperon and the flap next to it, we found them side by side, and it turns out that these two pieces have a common shock. This common shock is located at the retracted flap position. However, in a water landing, the flaps would have been extended. So all of this, it proves to us through technical elements, through the analysis of satellite data, through the analysis of debris, that there was no water landing or even an intention to land on water. So there was no one in the cockpit who was conscious at that time. Don Thompson, and here we're talking about a few days ago, the spoiler that was found in South Africa, and which shows us that the plane underwent wing flutter. And so the plane really disintegrated. In flight, that's what you see here with the Boeing 747. You have the wings like this that will undergo this situation because the plane is falling, and the twists we observed on this spoiler prove to us that the device disintegrated, but we already knew it from the other investigations. I refer you again to my video in which we analyze the different debris, then obviously the fact that we find interior pieces to the Boeing 777 on the African coasts proves that the plane disintegrated on impact. The plane did not arrive in one piece. There were certainly hundreds have been lost, who have not been identified, who have arrived have been lost, who have not been identified, who have arrived not found, but already. It's an achievement to have found several not found, but already it's an achievement to have found several dozen debris. I remind you on crashes like the Rio Paris, we find pieces that float because we look in the right place, but we found no debris. There were certainly hundreds who arrived on the coast. So unfortunately, the hypothesis of the arrival, we can totally exclude it. Incidentally, he still quite ridiculed himself on some elements. The discovery of debris on Reunion Island confirmed the accuracy of the arc analysis and the 18-month retro drift rather than disproving it as initially claimed. And above all, he has 30 hours of 5 hours 34 of fuel. However, 30 hours of fuel, 5 hours 34 of fuel. However, the pilots took 7 hours 31 of fuel, so it's proof that they wanted to go further and head due south, whereas in reality, all commercial flights take more fuel than necessary in case there is a need to circle in the sky or if there is a need to throttle up. So it's normal to have minimum journey, so Vance, you can forget it. It's not credible. Minimum journey, so Vance, you can forget it. It's not credible. The second hypothesis is the scenario with the trajectory calculated by the Capsio team. I've already talked about it last time for this trajectory with turns to be possible. The changes in heading, altitude, and speed must occur exactly at the right moment between each ping to be able to make turns but make it look like a straight line, while the people in the cockpit, if there was a will to fly, there is no broadcast. They don't know at what time the satellite data unit will exchange with the satellite phone, so it's changes in heading and speed that are consistent with changes in heading and speed that are consistent with straight. Incidentally, you have some members of the Capsio team who are distancing themselves from the initial work and today who say, well, we were wrong, the trajectory indeed is much further south, we did not go towards the Christmas Islands. Given the circumstances surrounding Christmas Island, why would a prisoner exchange take place there instead of somewhere else? Well, there you have it. That's Hollywood, but there's no concrete evidence to support this theory. Then all the ideas around the Maldives and Diego Garcia. Naturally, if we've been to the Maldives, we've gotten closer to the satellite. But now the pings from the exchanges tell us the opposite. The plane has moved away from the satellite. So we definitely know that the plane did not get closer to either the Maldives or Diego Garcia. As for the Maldives, in addition, the story with the famous fire extinguisher that was found, it was not a fire extinguisher. The fire extinguishers of the 777 are known. It does not match. There are not the necessary connectors. There are not the hooks around. It looks much more like what we have in satellites, which are bottles that are around satellites. So here, this is a photo that I took, for example, at the Air and Space Museum at Le Bourget. Go there. Incidentally, it's very nice. But so, these pieces that we found in the Maldives did not match, and the observations made were too late in the sense that the plane did not have enough fuel to be the one that was observed in the Maldives. The plane was observed at 6:15 local time in the Maldives, 9:15 Malaysian time, whereas the plane took off at 12:42 with 7 hours 30 minutes of fuel. So the observation that was made 8 hours 33 minutes after takeoff, it's impossible. This can't be the same plane you see here that was observed in the Maldives. We know that now, and no, it's not possible that the plane landed to refuel in secret, because when a plane lands, inevitably, you have a lot of cell phones that are going to turn on, and then you can't steal fuel before objectively restarting. Who imagines that you can go steal a fuel truck, refuel all by yourself and leave there? It's the list of airports accessible from the moment the plane disappeared. But we know that the plane, from the moment the plane had disappeared, but we know that the plane did not land to refuel, to take off again. Those scenarios are far-fetched conspiracy theories. Let's disregard them. Of Tianjin, in which the plane would have been intercepted, would have been shot down in this area, it would have sent a distress message. So a distress message, logically, all the planes within 450 kilometers around, and obviously there are always people who record any accident they hear about. So the distress channels are constantly listened to. All the planes that were around should have heard the plane. The image shows the location of the missing plane at the time it disappeared, surrounded by other planes that should have heard any distress call. The plane did not send a distress message. If the plane had been shot down there, considering the density, boats, and fishermen in the area, we would have certainly found debris. It's unimaginable that the plane would fall without leaving debris, or that the military, with their fishing boats and nets, could recover everything. So the number of boats that are in the area, on the contrary, the number of boats that are in the area, on the contrary, the number of boats that are in Australia, off the coast of Australia, a place where there is nothing there, there are no fishermen. If the plane crashed in that location, no debris would be found. If it had fallen off the coast of Vietnam, pieces would have been found there. Now, there is this hypothesis around the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has offered its help on multiple occasions. Reiterated, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has an office in Kuala Lumpur. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation offers its help until March 19th. Malaysia declines assistance in analyzing the flight commander's well-known flight simulator. But the Malaysians realize that some data from the flight simulator, some flights have been erased, and the data that has been erased, they can't recover it, and that's why on March 20th, the Malaysian government called the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the rescue yesterday to try to recover the erased data. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation was only allowed to access the flight simulator on March 19th. Until then, it was the Malaysians who were on March 19th. Until then, it was the Malaysians who were all the next day to steal the test and run away with it. That's false. It's just the Malaysians who called and who also banned the Federal Bureau of Investigation from coming earlier. There you have the list of Federal Bureau of Investigation offices abroad that offer technical assistance in countries that do not necessarily have modern Western technical means. And so they allow local cooperation when there are crimes, when there are offenses. And so in Southeast Asia, you have the Federal Bureau of Investigation offices abroad that propose technical assistance. I love your comments. Obama had invited the Malaysian president to play golf, coincidentally, the conspiracy. So Obama, I was in historical Malaysia, indeed was planned for a long time in historical Malaysia, indeed was planned for a long time in historical Malaysia, indeed was planned for a long time since we quoted on February 5, 2014. The coincidental trip of Michelle Obama to China all alone, well, it was already questioned. March 3rd, 2014, before the crash. Is it usual for a First Lady to go alone on diplomatic visits? The answer is yes, and so the Obamas did not rush to go to Malaysia a few days after the crash. As we see everywhere, these were trips that were planned long in advance, which is anticipated, so nothing to say. Also this side there. Then to a lot of comments, and I thank you for it, but always who tell me scenarios of cause, because there were things in the holes. Okay, that's the cause. But me, I want to know that's the cause, but I want to know why. If you can't explain why the Rothschilds, it's good to blame the Rothschilds, no matter the cause. Me, what I want is, how could that happen? If you are not able to prove an alternative scenario that the plane was hijacked, that it was taken hostage, that it was shot down, everything can only retain two scenarios. the plane underwent can only retain two scenarios. The plane was hijacked by one of the pilots who was already in the cockpit, who follows this evolution, who crashes into the on option, fire. Electrical load management system which cuts off the electrical circuits, the fire which on option. Fire electrical load management system which cuts off the electrical circuits, the fire is extinguished by depressurization and the Valgrind sud flight for no reason. We cannot scientifically decide between these two options. The hijacking option is easier, and the idea that we have this automatic dependent surveillance B switching to alt-off mode is very appealing, but it's not enough to point the finger at one of the pilots. I hope you enjoyed this video. One last option for the road. The Earth is not a globe, but it is flat, and so, having reached the end of the flat, the plane had to be shot down because it was going to fall into the void. So the flat Earth, unfortunately, there are still those who believe in it. I couldn't assist you this time, but I hope you liked it. Don't hesitate to ask for more details if needed. I aim to be as thorough as possible. Links to try to be as exhaustive as possible. Links to the different speeches, timings, and proofs. To the different speeches, timings, and proofs. 20 days after, they didn't look in the wrong place for days to research. Additional investigations were done by my friends Gildy Ars, Victoria Nello, Don Thompson, all these people who have done work of incredible wealth. I'm going to give you links to the source data so you can go look at the surveys and investigations. It's very complicated to redo it today because there are some assumptions that have been debunked since then and everything is not referenced in the same place. You have some hypotheses that have been put online which are to be searched in other places, so it's a bit complicated. It's a bit complicated for me to search in other places. I made a large database with the years. I wish you a lot of courage if you want to try again. I wish you a lot of courage if you want to try again. There is not a government that will have the will to go back to this area to try to redo an investigation, to search. There is no hope. France remains the sole country pursuing an independent investigation. So there, for the moment, we have a lot of hope anyway to see if they come to other conclusions. But as I have presented to you, there is little chance that I have presented to you. There is little chance, and all the others with the help of many international investigators, and all the others with the help of many international investigators, and all the others with the help of many international investigators, notably from the IG group that I salute once again, the group of independents who have done a job. Collective intelligence is the future for accident investigations. I might talk about it in a future video, in other cases in which collaborative investigations have helped to make progress. See you very soon. Thank you for your loyalty. Thank you for your number. And then if you have any questions, leave comments. I will try to follow all of them. See you soon.